first overall in 1994, played for the Panthers from 1995, 1999. The list goes on and on. I don't got to do this for you, Joe, but what's up?
Yeah.
How's it going?
It's good, man. Good. I'm excited. A few more days here to game one. Doing a lot of these shows, which is nice to talk about what probably a great series we're going to see here with a lot of star power. I'm really excited for the start on Saturday.
Well, I love how Johnny's just coming right in with the nickname, calling you Jovo. I mean, hey, look, kids these days, man, they don't always understand it, especially my co-host here, Johnny. But I'm sure you don't remember this. And before we get too deep in, I actually got a chance to meet you during the 11 finals. I was healthy scratching with the Boston Bruins for a couple of months that year, and we had a good night out at the Roxy during the 11 finals. It was JR, and there's a big group of people. And I know rarely do you leave the Roxy and have a full accounting of all the people that you were with, but it is good to see you again. Obviously, I remember that, that whole run was a hell of a lot of fun, finished really good for our team, but it's good to see you again, man. And we really appreciate you coming on, because we know that probably everybody and their mother is hitting you up to do these shows right now.
No, my pleasure. Yeah, I don't remember much of that night there, but any night at the Roxy is a good night. But yeah, let's get into it. I think it's going to be an excellent final.
Yeah, I actually want to start off with kind of a fun one, Jovo. Last year, we looked at this Florida Panthers team, and I've kind of been around them a little bit now, just within the media and whatnot, in their room when they're in New York at Madison Square Garden. And last year we were saying this team's cocky. They got a lot of swagger. And it's possible that they're even cockier this year and have more swagger this year, but also a little bit more humble at the same time, if that makes sense. But this brand of the Florida Panthers, I don't know if I've ever seen a hockey team like this just in my lifetime. But for you, I mean, being in Florida for as long as you have, what can you say about just the overall swagger of this team right now?
Well, they got swagger and they're healthy. So you put both together. You look at last year. I mean, they had a swagger. I don't think you get that far in the playoffs without feeling confident and have that swagger. This year, they're feeling good about their game. They're healthy. And, you look at the group, the way they play. I mean, there's really no, for whatever reason you want to call it, any holes in their game, right from the goaltender through their D, mobile, up in the play, big. You look at a lot of teams that win the Cup, go back to 11. I mean, when Boston, you guys won it. I mean, this horses on the back end. So they have that, and they have a deep lineup. And when you go up and down their lineup, they don't have to necessarily worry about who's on the ice if they're on the road and they're looking for matchups. I think Coach Maurice has the utmost confidence in all his guys to go out there and do the job. So when you kind of put all that together, I think they're primed to have, an excellent series. But you still got to play the games, and you still got to respect the Edmonton Oilers. They're a very good team. They got a lot of star power. Their goalies seem to have figured it out the last couple games. And it's all these kind of little inner games. What I'm most intrigued about is the matchup, McDavid, Barkov. How's that going to play out? So how are coaches going to get away from that matchup, per se. So overall, a lot of kind of unique storylines, heading into this playoffs.
Well, and you think about the embarrassment of riches that Paul Maurice has. You mentioned going back to 11, whether it was Seidenberg and Chara or Boychuk, and then you had McQuaid, you had you're right. It's a similarity to the back end, these big, heavy men who really just can grind you down. But, let's say McDavid finds himself away from Sasha Barkov. Who's standing right behind him is Gustav Forsling, who, has just been, such a revelation and is probably the best contract in the entire NHL right now. But it kind of leads me to the question, when I look at Florida, what is their strength? Because you said there's no hole. They're down the middle. They're unbelievably good. They're big and heavy back end. Their goaltending is world class. What is the actual strength? Is one thing better than the other? Are they just so good everywhere that you can't pick one area?
Yeah, I think you're right. I don't think you can really kind of focus on one area. I mean, there's so much talk about this team, how they forecheck. And when this team, you know, you look at the previous years, this team never liked to dump the puck. They were always a rush team. They always led the league in scoring chances off the rush. But you see now, I think a couple of years ago when Maurice kind of just backtracking a little bit, you know, Maurice came and said, listen, the team can score goals. You just can't win championships playing this way. So they buttoned down in certain areas. They found ways to win hockey games when the games were close. They do a layered system where if you're going to get one guy beat in the defensive zone, you're going to have to go through the next guy and the next guy to get to the net. And I think they defend so well. That comes with personnel. Obviously, you mentioned Gustav Forsling, who's as steady as they come on the back end. Him and Ekblad have been a deep pairing that probably going to see a lot of McDavid. But I mean, I really can't I think they're just good at everything they do. You know, look at that lineup. Like I said, there's no weakness on that group. They don't deviate from their game, which is a huge thing. You know, come playoff time, if you're down a goal or you're down 2 goals, we've seen teams come back in these hockey games. There's no reason to change it. I think they're so disciplined that way on sticking the course that they find themselves back in games or really burying teams.
Jovo, you said something before that actually was super interesting, the Barkov-McDavid matchup, right? And you look at the two of those guys and the conversation, I feel like for years now, when you ask who's the most underrated player in the NHL, it's always Alexander Barkov for whatever reason, right? It's always him. But you look at the production.
Not underrated by his peers.
No.
Just underrated to the fans.
Yeah, the general fan. But like Barkov's production, you know, point a game right now in the playoffs, conference final, 4 points in 6 games was -4, which like objectively isn't great, but his impact felt so much more than that. So for this, I don't want to say is it like sort of the prove it series for Barkov, because to me he already has, but for the hockey fans that are tuning into the Stanley Cup final, is this like Barkov's moment more than it might be McDavid's?
I mean, it could be. I think you get to this point, right? You want to be that guy to continue playing well. He's the captain of this team. He's the leader. He does all the little things. We can go on and on about Barkov's game, you know, how 200-foot player, how responsible he is in every area. He's a big body. But, I think this is – listen, you get to this point, you want it to be kind of – you know, that stamp of, hey, listen, you know, you lead your team to a Stanley Cup. But I don't think Barkov puts that pressure on him. I think he's really confident in his own game, that I think if he plays the way that he's expected to play, that he's going to have a big effect on this series, not only offensively, but on the other side as well, with the big task at hand, stopping all that star power on the other side. Now, it's not going to be one guy, right? Collectively, everybody's got to do their job and everybody's got to tug the same way. But overall, he touches so many areas of a hockey game, and a lot of the areas that maybe your regular hockey fan really doesn't pick up on. But, you know, people that are around the game, they know him backtracking and picking up a pass in the defensive zone or pickpocketing someone and going back the other way. I mean, he's noticed throughout the hockey world. Yeah. There's no question about that. He's a Selke winner again. I'm excited to see him. He's such a good kid. He's such a humble guy. Doesn't say much. He's not a big raw guy. But he's the first on the ice in practice. He's the last one to leave. He's a workhorse. And hopefully all that will pay off for him here in the finals.
His stick honestly reminds me of like what Zetterberg and Datsuk used to do. I mean, I remember playing against those guys at the Joe one night, and, you know, Footy was basically like, look, no, don't try any cute triangle passes. Don't try any seam passes, because these guys, they make you feel like they have it. They take it away. And I see Barkov, like, he just uses his stick as an absolute weapon on both sides of the puck. I mean, it's been fun to watch him on the bigger stage, because you're right. He doesn't get the same notoriety because he plays down in Florida, and they don't get the ABC Saturday games. And, you know, they should, but they don't. Those games happen between the Rangers and the Bruins, and, you know, and so we'll see what happens there. But there's another centerman on this team, Ed, that I really want to ask you about, a guy that I feel like has really sort of found his niche. And that's Anton Lundell. He's a former he's a first round pick a couple of years ago. This is only his third year. I think people kind of forget that because he does play pretty mature. But, he seems to me to really have settled into that role, and that third line role of just being a 200-foot complete heavy centerman. What have you seen? I mean, obviously you're on the broadcast for those guys, so you're around that team. Am my eyes lying to me, or have you kind of seen the progression in his game that makes you feel really good about having him as your guy down the middle?
Yeah, and I think you're right. And I think when you look at him on that third line, I have a feeling that that's where this series could separate. I mean, you look at the depth of the top two lines on both teams; they're great. As we go down the lineup, I think Lundell, Luosterainen, and Tarasenko, it could be a very effective line. But we obviously see him the last few years. There's stretches in his game where he kind of tails off, and that could be youth, could be fatigue, the system, playing against, elite players. But as the season goes along, Maurice, you can see him putting him in key situations. Taking key faceoffs. Something's not happening on the power play. He's the guy that's going, which we've seen here, in the playoffs. But he's a very high intellect player, and I wouldn't think otherwise, because look who he's hanging out with. Barkov. Yeah, that's his guy, and he's come out and said, "Listen, I couldn't have a better mentor come into this situation." Watching what Captain does each and every day. I think they spent some time living together, so that effect has really rubbed off on him. But he's a very, he's got a high hockey IQ, almost like a Sam Bennett type player when you really think the game well. I think Anton at a young age has really grasped on what his role will be in the NHL, and that could expand a little bit more as he gets a little bit more comfortable and a little more confidence, knowing that he can be a 20 to 30 goal guy in this league.
The confidence is definitely there. I think Colby and I joked about it last week. It was Lundell and I think Luosterainen who, like, back-to-back shifts in Game 5 went between their legs on Shesterkin, trying to roof it on him. I mean, in what world do you see third liners in a Game 5 doing that, right? Like,
that's the new norm in the
NBA. Yeah, that's what I said.
We joked about it, but
exactly what I said. Every fourth line guy can pick it up on their stick now, spin around.
Even Rempe, Colby?
Do a lacrosse? No, not Rempe. Everybody but Rempe.
But
he'll get there.
Huh?
He'll get there. He'll probably get there. I saw his interview last night.
He's
got big plans on working on it.
He does.
But yeah, you're right. Just quickly going on your fourth line. There's no more fourth line playing 2 minutes in this league. That's how good these guys are. Everyone's got to be able to play. So it's a nice mix of the guys on this group, especially.
Yeah, and kind of going back to that Ranger series a little bit, but also tying it into this. Florida did a great job at not getting into the shit after the whistle, right? Like, they really controlled their emotions because they didn't want to put the Rangers in the power play, obviously. And even when they did, they shut it down pretty well. How do you see this series being officiated? Because, obviously you have Connor McDavid on the other side, and the league has always been a little bit more protective of him, right? So with Florida and how they like to be a little bit of bullies, do you think they tone that back a bit, or do you think they try to get in 97's head right away?
Well, I don't think you can change the way you play. I think I hope to God we don't see, a penalty on, I think it was Suter, the game. And
oh my God. Oh, that was terrible.
It was so embarrassing that these are called. I don't see Florida getting away. I mean, that is their game, getting in hard. If you want to play a physical game, the team will play a physical game. You want to run and gun, and they can play that style as well. But I gotta believe that a focus is going to be, time and space. The old cliche, take it away from McDavid, bump him whenever you can. Draisaitl the same way. It might be a little bit tougher feet, kind of knocking him around. He's 30 man. But yeah, I think this team, you don't want to give the Oilers with that power play unnecessary penalties and power plays. Take stupid penalties after the whistle. But I think if the scrums are there, I mean, it's part of the game, and you'll kind of continue getting in there and try to agitate whatever way you can. But I think Florida's done a great job playing between the whistles and leave the garbage kind of to the side. But if you want to get into that, obviously, with Matthew, he's one of the best at it, getting in there after a whistle. But overall, I think play between the whistles. You want a great series. You want the officiating, at the end of the day, to be somewhat equal on the penalties. And we'll see where that goes. But I don't see any drop-off as far as the way this team has played heading into the Cup final.
Yeah, I think that's what makes Florida so difficult, is the fact that they can play so many different ways. They have guys like Bennett and Tkachuk that can play a skill game. They can play a run and gun game, or they can, they can play the way that I kept referring to Florida in the last round, and Johnny covers the Rangers. Like, that's kind of his home base. That's his team. They're like an NFL team that runs the ball 80% of the game. They grind you down, and they forecheck, and then their D are so mobile. They retrieve pucks. It's as complete as that I've seen from a team in a long time. Look, I know you got to run here. You got another minute or two, but I want to go a little off the board with the last thing I want to ask you. Unrelated to the Florida Panthers, because, Wayne Gretzky's all over TV right now. And in any time he talks, I feel like everybody on their couch is just like, they're ready to listen to him, right? So awesome having him on TNT. You played for him in Phoenix, and you were there potentially during the whole JR, Gretzky situation. JR was like refusing to go on the ice. JR's told me these stories. What was playing for Gretzky like, and just like being around that? Like I was saying to Johnny before you came on, one of the coolest things like about, your career to me, and I'm not trying to age you, I'm going to be 36, but so I got to watch you growing up, and then you were still playing when I was coming in, and had my little cup of coffee in the NHL. I was mostly an American League player, but, guys like that, you got to touch the generation and play through the generation of Sakic and you and all those guys. And then also, I was in San Antonio when you were in Florida at one point. And so all those guys, Trocheck, Shore, Gilroy, like all those guys, like, you touched all these generations. You played for Wayne Gretzky. So,
and then Jans and Biz too, right?
You had them all, right? Like
yeah.
They all kind of, you're like, you got like a coaching tree now almost. So what was Gretzky like as a coach? Like, what was that like? And just these different generations of hockey players to where we're at now.
Well, he was great. I mean, as kids growing up, I mean, obviously the Gretzky factor, you're just like, in awe. And, I think for me, I had the experience, in 2002, with him at the Canadian Olympic team. And, so I was around Wayne, and obviously I remember the first time playing against him, I was just like lining up next to him. And I'm like, is this really kind of happening? It's probably the same thought that every player has, anytime you faced Wayne or on the same ice as him. But listen, he was a passionate guy. He cared about his players. He wanted to win. He wanted to win, to the point where I think he just didn't understand that guys couldn't do things like he did. And I really say that because he had a soft spot for young players. And we had young, Mikhail Bodker. He wasn't ready to play.
Yeah, I remember him.
Tikhonov. He wasn't ready to play. Kyle Turris wasn't ready.
Yep, none of them were.
But he kept playing them. And he had that because he was in that same boat. And he wanted to see everyone excel and do better. But I think at some point, like, he would sit back on the bench and be like, geez, man, like, what's going on here? Why can't these guys do it? And it's a tough league. I mean, we all know it, right? It's a tough league at a young age to come in, especially at the forward position, to play against men now when you're a teenager and have success. But overall, what I take from Wayne is he loves his players. He'll do anything for them. He's easy, very approachable guy. And his passion for the game, not only then, but now, it's the best game in the world. And he makes sure he lets the globe know that it is the best game and the toughest trophy to win.
Yeah, a lot of those guys were from my draft, so I'm familiar with Bodker, and I played against him quite often. So he's a talented guy, but you see it, guys. Sometimes they come too early, and then it never actually works out, and you always wonder, like, what would another year of college done for that guy, or junior, or the American League? And so it's funny that you mentioned some of those names. Vinny Trocheck is kind of on the other side of it. He spent some time in the American League. He worked his way through. He went through a couple of teams, and now look at what he's found as a niche in the NHL.
I think what is for this case, the Florida Panthers, they have that luxury now, be able to draft a player and kind of let him ride the bus. Let him experience, as Biz and Witz call it, the jungle, just to see what that and grow as a player and as an individual, turn into an adult. And now when you come up, you're a little bit more seasoned. You got some age on you. You filled in your body a little bit, and it's not going to come easier, but I think you have a better understanding, of the game. And I think teams that are not so rushed on bringing in their talent, that do a good job bringing in veterans, and you have some time to let these guys develop, it's necessarily not a bad thing.
Well, Florida also has the luxury of being able to sign whoever they want, because everyone wants to come play there, so they can take as much time as they need.
Right. Yeah, you got the one issue with the salary cap, but you got to be smart about it. And obviously Bill Zito has come into this situation, not just giving the checkbook to anyone, really thought out character guys. You got a busy off season trying to get these guys done.
I love how Paul Maurice calls the UFAs all assholes, so nobody else gets them.
Lazy bums. They don't work hard. They got an interesting summer ahead of them.
All right, well, Jovo, we got to let you go here, and we really appreciate your time. But before we do, we are required to ask your Conn Smythe pick for the Florida Panthers if they win the Stanley Cup.
Sergei Bobrovsky.
All right. Good pick. But we appreciate your time. Hope you enjoy the final. Hope there's a fun party in Fort Lauderdale the next 2 weeks or 3 weeks, however long the series goes. I think it's the whole month of June. But
right, can you imagine June 24th, Game 7?
Be pretty sick. Thanks, Jovo. We appreciate your time.
Anytime.
What's up, hockey fans? If you enjoyed that video, then you need to be hitting the subscribe button right here at Daily Faceoff. Exclusive interviews and analysis from our hockey insider Frank Saravalli, fantasy updates from Brock Sagan, and a daily live show at noon Eastern, Monday through Friday. You don't want to miss any of the fantastic content, so hit that subscribe button.